Hey guys, it's Kevin in the movie for guys. I'm reviewing. I honestly can't believe this movie really did come out when it did. I'm still kind of speechless that this movie actually did come out. But of course, this took us all by surprise. But the movie I'm reviewing is none other than the latest film from Netflix. That, of course, being the Cloverfield Paradox. And what the Cloverfield Paradox is essentially about is we center on these group of scientists, and essentially in the film, the Earth is pretty much on the brink of destruction. It's just really been polluted, and it's not working the way it used to. So these scientists are trying to find a way to make it right again, and in doing so, they end up realizing that the Earth might have actually disappeared, and after this, all these weird happenings start to occur, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, the Cloverfield Paradox in general, obviously, I had no anticipation for this movie whatsoever. I mean, all I knew is that at some point this year, we were going to get a third Cloverfield. Now, I expected that it was going to come on Netflix. It just kind of seemed inevitable that that's what they were going to do, because when you hear Netflix is in talks, they're going to take it. I've said this a million times. The problem with Netflix is that they just don't know how to say no. But with something like this, oh yeah, I'd totally take the opportunity. I mean, 10 Cloverfield Lane was huge. Obviously, I'd take the opportunity to release the third one on Netflix. And not only did they do that, but they released it literally the second the trailer came, not the second the trailer came out, but the second the Super Bowl was over, and released the trailer on that exact same day. It's some of the most genius marketing I've ever seen, honestly. I've truly never seen anything of that magnitude where not only did they just completely take you by surprise, but not only is there just a trailer that comes out of nowhere, but that same trailer has the full movie coming out tonight. I mean, I've never really seen something like that before, and I think that in general is a true marvel and something I think we're going to talk about for many years to come. So naturally my anticipation was through the roof. I mean, obviously 10 Cloverfield Lane I absolutely love. I think it's one of the best thrillers of this entire decade. So I was really looking forward to this, and unfortunately, as amazing as the marketing was for Netflix, that's really the only thing that's extraordinary about the Cloverfield Paradox, because other than that, we have a very bland, very run-of-the-mill sci-fi film you've seen a million times before. It's not terrible, but it definitely does have a lot of problems, but it does have some good things about it as well, and we're going to get into that starting off with the cast. And right off the bat, that is actually one of the selling points of this film. The cast here, from top to bottom, is pretty much phenomenal. I mean, it's very well casted. These are all very talented individuals, and I do think there are definitely some really great performances throughout this film, but easily the standout in this movie is Gugu Mbatha-Raw as the character of Ava Hamilton, who I really liked her in this movie. I've seen her in other things before, like the Beauty and the Beast remake and things like that, but this is really the first movie where she truly did stick out to me, and she does a very good job at carrying this film. Even when this film goes into some really silly territory, she 100% commits to it, and you really do care for her character because of that. She really does pour a lot of emotion and heart and soul into the character, and I could really see her becoming a future star in the future. Definitely she's an actress to watch out for. She really did an incredible job in this movie, especially in the third act when a certain reveal happens. She absolutely killed it. I really did love her performance throughout the film, and definitely, like I said, she is easily, far and away, the best thing about this movie, for sure. Now, similar to some other movies I reviewed, the rest of the cast here, again, because of how good Mbatha-Raw is, sorry if I'm, again, butchering her name, the rest of the cast, there's really not much to say about them. I mean, they all do play their parts pretty well. David Oyelowo, of course, is good. Daniel Brühl does a good job here. Chris O'Dowd has a very strange role. You'll see what I mean when you see the movie, but it's a very weird role overall. Elizabeth Debicki, I guess, did a good job. We'll get to her character in a little bit, but I guess she did a good job. Roger Davies in this movie, he plays Ava's husband in the film, and he overall did a pretty good job. I did enjoy his performance here. Really, no one I thought was bad. I think everyone did do a pretty good job overall, and that's definitely something I will give this film. Now let's get to the directing and the writing, because here's where we start to have some major problems with the film. Right off the bat, the directing to this movie is very tonally inconsistent. It clearly does not know what it wants to be. Is it trying to be a fun sci-fi film? Is it trying to be this sort of compelling psychological thriller? Is it trying to be it does not know what it wants to be, and it really doesn't work. When the film's trying to be an entertaining sci-fi film, it does work at points. There definitely are some fun moments in the film, and I will admit the sci-fi portions were things I did overall enjoy. But again, it's really all over the place. I didn't really feel like the film knew what it wanted to be, and that really did disappoint me. Also, this movie, similar to 10 Cloverfield Lane, does have a lot of humor, but unlike 10 Cloverfield Lane, almost all of the humor here falls completely flat. In fact, I can't remember one time where I actually laughed at the humor in this movie. It just felt so forced, and nothing about the humor I thought worked in this movie. It just kind of felt like they were doing that to add some sort of entertainment value, and it just really didn't work at all. So the humor, like I said, really does fall flat. But that's not the biggest problem with this movie, because again, the tone's very inconsistent, but if it had a good story and maybe some good characters, then I could get behind it. Unfortunately, that's what really pales into comparison with this film. And I'm sorry I'm going to compare it to 10 Cloverfield Lane, but I mean, they're in the same franchise now, so I basically have to. 10 Cloverfield Lane, one of the best things about the movie was that it was, for the most part, a self-contained thriller. Sure, it did have its loose connections to Cloverfield, but it was a character study, and it did a very good job focusing on just those three characters, and it didn't really need to focus on anyone else. I mean, sure, there were other, there were brief other, characters in the movie, but it mainly only focused on those three characters, and it did a very good job of, centering its focus on those characters. Cloverfield Paradox, on the other hand, is almost the complete opposite. I mean, not only does this movie not really develop any of its characters, it doesn't really seem to care much about these characters. It's almost as if this movie was just kind of made as a placeholder. That's really what this feels like. It doesn't feel like this was an entry that really does a lot for this franchise. It feels much more like a setup movie, and that's really what this film is trying to be. It's trying to be this film that adds all these new, interesting ideas to the series, and there is some stuff here that is interesting. The film introduced the idea of the multiverse and all these different ramifications that could happen with time travel and all these cool things, but again, it just doesn't focus on it enough, and it tries to it explains stuff to you in a very quick way, to the point where you're just very confused throughout the film. And throughout the film, there were a lot of things that were going on, and I didn't really understand a lot of what was going on, because again, it's just not very well explained, and that did definitely annoy me a bit. I really did want to know more of what's actually going on here, and it just didn't really work in that sense. And that's something that did definitely piss me off. Also, while 10 Cloverfield Lane, like I said, was a very loose connection to the series, this movie is really trying to start a Cloverfield cinematic universe. And maybe you could say that with 10 Cloverfield Lane, but again, that felt much more like just, a standalone movie that happened to be in the same universe. This one is literally starting a franchise, and it just doesn't work at all. It's trying to overcomplicate things. It's throwing all these things at you. And in the same way people talk about The Last Jedi and how that overcomplicated things, that's how I feel about the Cloverfield Paradox. There's just so many attempts to connect things to the first movie, and most of it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Also, I should mention that half of this movie also takes, not half, but about a fraction of this movie also takes place on Earth, where they're basically trying to connect things to the first movie, and it really doesn't work at all. It feels very disconnected from the rest of the story, and apart from a news broadcast and things like that, barely any of the Cloverfield stuff actually takes place on space. The only connections we get with that is that their space station happens to be called Cloverfield, but other than that, that's why for a while this was called Cloverfield Station. Other than that, there's really not many other connections there, and that also really did disappoint me, I have to say. But like I said, the biggest problem with this movie, besides that, is also the lack of character development. They really don't seem to care much about these characters, and most of these actors are completely wasted. I mean, Daniel Brühl, he was billed as the main character in this movie. He's not the main character. Gugu Mbatha-Raw is definitely the main character. He is much more of a supporting role. He has, like, nothing to do in this movie. He's completely wasted. David Oyelowo as well. It's also very wasted here. Chris O'Dowd, he's in this movie for a while, and then just kind of disappears, and there's really not much going on with him either. Elizabeth Debicki, let's talk about her character, because she shows up in this movie, and she's kind of intriguing. It's like, oh, I really want to know more about her character, but then the third act of the film, they take this weird direction with her, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense at all, and to be honest with you, after that, I'm really struggling to figure out what her actual point was in this movie. Like, why did she really need to be here? Other than the fact that there's really not a lot going on in this movie before all this drama's here. And I mean that when I say there's really not much going on. I mean, sure, there is a very loose series of events, but there's really not much of a plot line in this movie. The plot line of the Earth disappearing, that is a good plot line. There's definitely a lot you can do with that, but the film, again, it doesn't want to delve that deep into that concept, and it just doesn't really work overall. Also, the dialogue in this movie really isn't too good. I found the dialogue here to be very lackluster. Again, that was one of the best things about 10 Cloverfield Lane was the screenplay, but the dialogue here is really sometimes laughably bad. It seemed like something on like an NBC show, and again, some of those shows aren't bad, but I'm talking about like one of the low budget ones that you see, maybe like one of those procedural shows. That's really what this felt like. It didn't feel like movie dialogue. It felt very on the nose, and it just didn't really work at all. And that really, like I said, didn't work for me. I thought a lot of the dialogue was just very on the nose, very obvious. They're over-explaining all these things to you, and again, it just made me more confused than ever. And like I said, the film doesn't really do much with his characters. Well, that is up until the third act. The third act, there's a revelation. I'm not going to say what happens, but it actually was really cool. I was like, ooh, I actually really like them. I'm interested in seeing really where they do go with it. And while they do go somewhere with it, they don't take it really anywhere that interesting. It kind of just... it happens, and then it's just not really talked about again. It did kind of piss me off. I really wanted them to delve deeper into this specific revelation because I thought it was a cool idea, but they don't really do anything with it. And like I said, that definitely did anger me quite a lot. The cinematography here as well really isn't too good. It's very, very low budget. You can tell that they really did not have much of a budget here. I heard a rumor that the reason this was on Netflix is because they did not have that much of a budget to acquire a theatrical release, and you really can tell here. Their budget here, it just feels like something off, say, like the Sci-Fi Channel. The visual effects really are not too good. There's a lot of stuff here, particularly a scene towards the end. Oh my god, it was awful, especially compared to 10 Cloverfield Lane as well. This is a significant step down in quality, and it really does not work. The score, I actually really do like the score that Bear McCreary did provide. I love the score for 10 Cloverfield Lane. I really like this score as well. It definitely is a really good score overall. And then the editing, like I said, something I will give this movie is that it is pretty fast-paced. It's very breakneck pacing, but I do feel that does kind of hurt the film at points because there's things that the film should be diving into, and they're just not. There's so many loose ends in this film that are just kind of left dangling, and again, it feels like they're trying to set up another movie. Like, it very much feels that way. Like, this is just a setup movie, and there's some big payoff coming, but especially considering the lukewarm response this has gotten, I really don't think that's going to happen, and it's unfortunate because there is things that I would like them to dive deeper into, but the way things do wrap up here, I'm sadly to say, I don't think it's going to happen, and that, like I said, just left me feeling very unsatisfied, and there was so much more I really wanted from this movie. And like I said, there is about a fraction of this movie that does take place on Earth. It's only like 2 scenes, but there is actually some really effective stuff there, especially because of how well Gugu Mbatha-Raw's performance is here. You know, she's a character who lost both of her children, and her husband have like this struggling marriage, and that story was much more interesting than basically most of what we got in this movie. I actually really did latch on to that story. Unfortunately, once again, it just feels like an afterthought. It never really felt like it was at the forefront of anything until later in the movie, and then when it is, it just kind of cuts it's just kind of cut short, and that's really the best way to describe this entire movie. There were just so many great ideas, but I feel like all of them were just really cut short, and it just didn't really work overall at all. Overall, guys, Cloverfield Paradox, it's not a bad movie, but honestly, it feels really unnecessary. Like, nothing about this movie really felt like it needed to exist. Again, it just felt like a filler film. They're making a fourth Cloverfield movie later this year, and I'm much more interested in that. That actually, you know, the World War II film that's coming out, Overlord, that sounds more along the lines of what this series should be. You need to make this like an anthology series, and not try to make a Cloverfield cinematic universe where you try to, like, explain everything that happened in the first movie. It just doesn't really work. It definitely failed here. There are a lot of things that are completely unexplained, so many actors that are very underused, and just left me feeling very hollow. There was so much more I wanted from this movie. There were so many things they could have done with this film, so many new ideas, so many interesting things they could have brought to the series, but they just didn't do that. It feels very derivative. You've seen this stuff 100 times before. There really isn't anything that extraordinary about, apart from its very, like I said, groundbreaking release. Other than that, there really isn't much to really latch onto in this film, and unfortunately I am going to give the Cloverfield Paradox overall a C-. Like I said, other than some good performances and some really interesting ideas, this is basically your typical mediocre middle-of-the-road Netflix film. Once again, it baffles me how Netflix continues to sign on to everything. It tried to overcomplicate the series, it really didn't work at all, and again, like I said, just left me feeling very hollow, especially towards the film's end. But overall, guys, in my review, the Cloverfield Paradox overall, let me know what you guys saw of this movie, loved your thoughts on it. Like I said, didn't hate it like most people are, but I really didn't like it either. I thought it could have been so much more. I thought there was so much wasted potential, and like I said, it just left me feeling very hollow in the end. But that's in my review. Hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.